I'll be interviewing Mr. Daniel, who is a worldwide business manager for 5G mobile networks at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He is an expert in electrical engineering and telecommunications. Through his job, Mr. Daniel works closely with software developers and product designers as the person who coordinates the two groups. In our previous conversation with him, Mr. Daniel was able to give us some insight into how the technology company functions, the roles and scope of work different people have within the industry, how the technology industry operates on a greater scale, and especially how the technology industry is so much more than just software developers writing code. Stay tuned to get an inside look at the real world of technology. Good afternoon, Mr. Daniel. How have you been?
I'm doing really well. How about you?
We're good, thank you. Before we get into our interview, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Chris, and I've been working in the telecommunications industry since about 1994, so getting close to 30 years now. And if you're just looking for a little bit of personal background, I grew up in the Midwest, out in Missouri, went to the University of Arkansas, lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma for about 10 years, and have now been in New Jersey for most of the last 20 years.
Before we get started with the other questions, we would first like to ask you about some of your career background.
Sure.
So your first question is, what is your current job and what do you do as a part of that?
Sure. Okay. So my current job, as you said in the title, is business line manager. What that really means is that I work within what's called the product management organization. And so I'm basically responsible for ensuring that products are both developed and then delivered to market in a way that meets the customer needs, that is ultimately meets the business needs. In other words, that they're profitable. And so I have to balance all of the needs as far as how do you develop the product, but also make sure we do it in a way that we meet the time to market for the customer, as well as make sure that we're making more money than we're spending in order to develop it. And so I've got responsibility for the business case for how long we have to do that, because new products require more costs at the beginning than they will revenue. So you have a period of time with a business case for how fast you expect the revenue to grow, and to make sure that you're balancing your cost with that to meet the market. So I work in the product management side and make sure that our products are successful.
So our second question is, what did you study in college, and what was your what job were you aiming right out of college?
Okay, so I went to school, as I said, at the University of Arkansas. This was back in the early 1990s. At that point, computers were just being introduced. Most people didn't actually even have home computers. I only had a couple of friends that actually had their own computers that they were working on in school. You had to go to computer labs in order just to get access to a computer. Very different time then, right? This was way before mobile phones. And so I went to school for electrical engineering. At that time, computer science degrees were just starting. And so I went to school for electrical engineering. And when I went to university, it was actually the idea of smart homes, which was actually what intrigued me to go into electrical engineering to begin with. You know, in hindsight, that is mainly about computer science anyway. I just wasn't smart enough to know that. And so I've been fortunate enough through my career to have a little bit of exposure and work in the smart home industry. But ultimately, when I came out of university, I went to work for a telecommunications company. What in the industry is called a service provider. Most of you would know that as companies like AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile. I went to work in that side of the telecommunications industry, where we were delivering products to businesses and consumers for about the first 10 years of my career. Now, when I first went in, I was very fortunate. Some of these programs still exist, but they called them engineering development programs. And it kind of fits into what you're trying to do here. Many people coming out of university, definitely coming out of high school, they really don't know how to apply their skills into the select industry yet. And so I was able to join a development program where we did 3 9-month rotations, and we got the opportunity to do different things. And so some of them were engineering, some of them were product management, some of them were test and acceptance or deployment services. So my very first job was actually going out and installing and configuring long distance fiber optics equipment. So what they call SONET. And so I actually found that to be extremely beneficial, because one of the things in university, you get a lot of theory that you don't get to use the equipment a lot. And so the first experience out of college of being able to put your hands on the system and actually learn the usage of it. How do you actually make it work in a real world environment? I found to be very useful.
Our third question is, what other jobs did you have before getting your current job, and how did you get to having your current job now?
Okay, that is a really good question. And I have to admit, my experience is going to be very different than many people. I've held a lot of different jobs, and I doubt you actually want me to list all of them for you, but I can kind of give you a progression, because in order to do something like I do as a business line manager, you have to have a lot of different views of how your products work. How do the customers use them? How do you sell them? How do you deliver them? How do you develop them? How do you support them? And so I've actually had that experience from a variety of different ways. As I said, I started on the service provider side, and I actually did operations, I did engineering, I did support, I did product development, I did project management. I ended my time on the service provider side actually in a very technical role, which I led an advanced technology organization. So working on the evolution of telecommunications equipment to really, kind of like today you hear 3G, 4G, 5G. It was the kind of same concepts. It was really working on major generational shifts in technology. Now, what ended up happening is I ended up moving to the supplier side, the ones that are developing the equipment. And so I was hired by a startup. And so they were working on some interesting technology, but the types of roles I had with them were primarily in pre-sales and business development. And what that basically means is I was still in a very technical role coming out of the service provider background. And I would go talk to customers all around the world. And I would go talk to them about the problems they were experiencing and helping them understand how this startup, this new technology was going to be a new way, a better way to solve the kind of problems that they were experiencing. But because it was a startup, right, it maybe had 120 people. It was a fairly small company in my kind of an industry. We were trying to sell into places like Japan, South Korea, parts of Europe. And so part of that is we really didn't have the sales and delivery capability to go into all of those unique countries. And so part of what I did, called business development, was to go establish the partnerships, go establish the companies that would actually take our products to the end customers. So I established the business chain between the three parties, the one that was developing the product, the one that was selling and delivering the product in that market to the end customer. So a lot of business relationships, and that's kind of how I started in that area. After I left that startup, I actually went to Hewlett Packard. And so at that point, I was working exclusively with the Verizon companies, Verizon Wireless, Verizon Business, and was dedicated to them as an account. And again, doing sales, pre-sales work with them, selling a wide variety of technologies. And then after that, I ended up in product management, where I've now been responsible for about 3 different divisions inside of product management, all again selling what we would call core network technology inside of mobile networks, which is really It's not, the device. It's not the handset itself. It's not the radio networks of how your device gets to the telecommunications network. It's all the stuff that happens after you get across the wireless network. So I work in the core networks. That's how I got here. But again, you see, the important thing was it took a lot of different experiences in selling, understanding how you're delivering, understand relationships between companies, understanding how products were developed themselves and how you support them. It's having to understand all of those different environments, because that's what a business line manager is make sure that all of the pieces work together so that you can do it profitably. If any of those pieces don't work correctly, then you can't do it profitably. So you have to make sure that, and the customer is satisfied with the product that you deliver.
So our fourth question is, how much of what you know in your area of expertise do you think you learned in college and you learned by actually doing in your field?
Okay, that's a really great question. And I'm sure there's some people that will answer this question very differently from the way I'm going to answer it. So, for example, if you went to school in computer science and then you went in and you're doing coding or you're doing networking, you're going to learn a lot of the coding languages. You're going to learn a lot of the networking fundamentals. You're going to learn a lot of that in your computer science degree. Honestly, because I was an electrical engineer whose first job was straight into the telecommunications industry, I think there's only one thing that I learned in college that I've ever applied in my entire career. So almost everything was learned on the job through experience. Now, I don't want to say that to some people because it would sound disheartening. Why do I go to school for so long in order to go into a field and I don't use it? Some people definitely will use what they learn. However, what a lot of times I've told people is college is not necessarily about exactly what you learn as much as how you learn to think, how you learn to solve problems. Because what you learn is very logical, very systematic ways of thinking. You learn how systems work together. You learn how those things work. And you learn how to get resources. Where do you go in order to find the answers to problems? So whether that's to books, whether that's to other people, whether that's to research, wherever it is, you're engineers. That's what you really are. You're problem solvers. And so the most important part that I found of my college degree was just that foundational ability in order to have a process by which to solve problems. And I applied that every day.
A lot of what you ended up doing now is kind of the accumulation of where you were before in your career and the different things that you did. So
yeah, absolutely.
Some jobs would be more like you learn something in school and that's directly applied and that's the thing you're going to be doing in your career. But for people like you who progress through a set of different jobs and that like a more coordinating kind of job like a manager or whatever other jobs they're called like this.
Yep.
People don't usually like aim like I'm gonna be manager and do that, right? They just kind of, I would imagine they just kind of find their way through and at some point end up like in that position. So for people who maybe I don't know, like go into working in like a technical part or like somewhere like that and find that they maybe want to do something bigger than just like a particular part within the company, do they tend to find their way up like this or like?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're working for a good company, good companies help their employees with career development, right? And literally, as a manager, I sit down with my employees multiple times through the course of the year and talk about career planning, right? And so what you're going to find is there's going to be some people that are going to come out of with their degrees and they're going to be very comfortable in those technical skill roles, right? They don't want to be a manager. They don't. But you're going to find out that in order to advance, even within a technical role, leadership skills and communication skills become very, very important. Because if you want to advance, if you just want to stay at a lower level and be comfortable just sitting in front of a computer by yourself and just kind of doing what someone else tells you to do, you can absolutely do that. You can get a job, you can be very comfortable. But even if you want to advance into higher and higher technical roles, you've got to influence large numbers of people. And the more senior you become in technical roles, the more critical the kind of things I'm talking about become, because ultimately you're using technology to create some type of business results, right? And so if I got a guy I was just talking to this week, he's literally filed like 5 patents in the last year, right? But the patents that he's working on all are because, hey, I'm working in the 5G area and I found these gaps in the way that 5G comes together, and they haven't solved this problem, they haven't solved that problem, and they have to be solved. And so he's looking at the technology and basically saying, not only for his personal good, not only for the good of his team, not only for the good of our company, but for the good of the industry at large, these kind of problems have to be solved. Not only do you then have to have the ability to get it written down, to apply it, you actually have to be able, I'll use the term, you have to be able to sell it. You have to be able to communicate it. You have to be able to explain to other people, why is that problem exist? Why is the way that I want to solve it the best way to do it? Why couldn't it be solved in other ways? Why should we spend the money to be able to solve that problem? And why should you spend the money now versus wait to spend the money 5 years from now? So even in the technical areas, again, when you're trying to solve problems, at the end of the day, it all comes down to this balance between you don't just have to play with technology for the sake of playing with technology. You're doing technology for the sake of delivering some kind of a result. And the higher you want to go up, whether it's on a technical path or a management path, you have to know how that technology is ultimately delivering some type of results to your business, what the value it is it's providing to the customer. You have to be able to explain those things. And I will say one other thing, which is the higher you get, the better you have to work in teams. The lower you are, somebody's going to tell you what to do. You may sit in your environment, you may develop it, you may work with one other person to test it, those kind of things. The higher you get into team leader roles and architect roles and those kind of higher level roles, you're working with lots and lots of people. And the soft skills of being able to communicate, to be able to influence, to be able to get people to come around to your view, and also really important is to listen to what other people are saying and not find it offensive, not feel that you're wrong because someone else has a good idea. How do you take all of those things in and take other people's ideas in order to make the overall solution even better, rather than to feel that those other ideas are threatening to what you're trying to do? So the higher you get, the more skills that you have to have that are related to your core, to your personality, to the way you interact with other people. And you still have to have the good, solid technical engineering skills, but you have to be able to work with people is what makes you successful at those higher levels.
Now that we've established a bit about your career and how you got here, we would like to ask a question about your area of expertise. So many students who are interested in pursuing a technology-related career focus heavily on learning how to code, which is highly specific to software developers.
Yep.
After hearing your story, it sounds like there's so much more in the technology industry other than just developers. So what is your advice to students who plan on going into the technology industry?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm going to kind of build on the answer that I gave all the way back at the beginning about my first job, right? So when you're coming out of engineering, there are definitely people, and my nephew is a great example, went in, got their first career straight in, IT doing coding, right? But I would say there's probably also, even within software and IT systems, there's multiple levels involved inside of there, right? You have the coding itself. You have the infrastructure that it's based on, right? You have all the hardware related aspects of servers and storage and networking. You have routing. You have all of the different things about how systems are built and how they talk together. You're going to find more and more the use of open source software. So whether you're actually contributing directly to open source technology or actually applying open source technology and integrating systems together, a lot of those kind of jobs relate. So there's a multitude of jobs just within kind of the IT sector that I can kind of say you don't have to just focus on coding. There's all sorts of stuff in terms of building computer systems, from the infrastructure all the way up to the application, and then the networking of how all those systems talk to each other across the internet, across a corporate IT environment, all of those kind of environments. Now, I would encourage someone actually to go the other direction and not their first job go straight into coding. My first job I would encourage is to find out how to use the systems. Because if you're going to write good quality code, you have to know how those systems are actually going to be used in a real world environment. And so a lot of times the technical terms that we would use, they're not even that technical. They're almost obvious. They're descriptive. Delivery, right? You basically take an enterprise system. You think about some of the big systems like SAP or some of the various Microsoft enterprise software, some of those somebody has to take those big systems, Salesforce.com, you have to take those from the supplier and you actually have to integrate them into an environment. And in order to do that, all of these big pieces of software, they have lots and lots of options inside them. Do I configure it? Use something very simple that people relate to. Do I configure this in an IPv4 environment, or do I configure it in an IPv6 environment? Do I set up TLS, or do I not set up TLS security encryption, right? Do I set, all of those kind of configuration options. And so the first thing I would highly encourage people to do is actually spend some time in the roles that actually deploy and deliver those software, see how they're used, see not only how are they deployed, but actually spend some time with the users of those systems, see how they're going to use those systems once they're actually out in the field. Because once you understand the usability of the software, your coding is going to be so much better. You're actually going to start thinking about how you code rather than just saying, hey, they told me to do this, right? Somebody, a system engineer, is usually going to write requirements by which a coder writes against. Or in Agile, you may hear that referred to as a product owner, a PO, right? And so those kind of people are going to write down requirements that say, hey, coder, make the software do this, do it in this way. But if you've actually got the experience of the user, you're going to be able to add value on top of those requirements because you know how they're actually going to use it. And you're going to write your software in a certain way. Not only is it going to have lower bugs, it's going to be written in such a way that the people that are using your software, it's going to make their lives easier. And we've all used bad software where you go into a website and you try to figure out how to do something. And you're like, what were they thinking? I can't figure out how to pay for it. I can't figure out how to select the option. Why are these things so far apart? Right? That's all design experience. User experience is what it's called. And so you got to think about these things when you're writing code, which is, just because you as a coder thought it looked obvious, the question is, does the normal user of the system actually, are they going to think about it the same way? Or are you just thinking about technical construct of code? So you need that code to represent itself so the user can use it well. So I would highly, highly recommend that one of your first jobs out of college actually be somewhere where you're getting experience and exposure to how the systems and software are going to be used to enable you to actually be a better coder. And when you do that, you're also going to break that thought process that you asked me about. Because most people, they coded in college or they did network in college. I want to get my code or my first job as a coder, and they're going to stay a little bit mentally trapped in that box of, hey, I need to write code. But if you get outside of the box, all of a sudden, not only do you figure out how the code gets better, but all of these other things that I've talked about. Oh, by the way, I got to make money at this. Somebody's got to sell it. Is it obvious? What are the values of the product that make the customer want to buy our product compared to somebody else's? What do I have to develop in the product that makes my product better than the competitors? You're going to actually have to ask those questions. Well, what happens if something goes wrong, right? When you're delivering software, you're going to find maybe the way that the coders thought it should work doesn't work, and you're going to have bugs, you're going to have support issues, you're going to see a lot more of the business working in those kind of things than just going straight into the coding box. And so I highly recommend that kind of experience first.
Is it like easy to get the chance to like you said, like get into a first job that like lets you have this chance to look at the bigger picture of like the product and such? Like, is there a reason as to why most people just seem to jump straight into coding and they kind of stay in coding, or some sort of like technical side?
It's an interesting question. I would probably answer that question in two ways. It's a little bit of a mind shift. I would say a lot of people get the jobs directly in coding because that's what they're looking for, right? They don't, this is exactly why you guys want to do this project. I don't think they know to look for these other kind of jobs. My experience is the opposite. I think a lot of companies, a lot of big companies are actually more interested. They have more opening opportunities in the kind of areas that I'm talking about than they do in the straight coding field, right? And so I think if you're looking for them, whether you're looking at any of the big IT companies, whether you're looking at something like a Microsoft or a Dell or an Oracle, or go to the what we call the hyperscalers, right? Whether you're going to Google Cloud, you're going to Microsoft Azure, whether you're going to Amazon Web Services, any of those kind of companies, they've got so much opportunity for people to do delivery. And what I've experienced is many times the kind of programs that I talked about, the ability to hire new people and onboard them in those kind of jobs, I think they're as prevalent, if not more, than standard coding jobs.
Then would you say that if you are aiming to go into the technology industry, that in college you should like branch out and like study more areas rather than just like one area like coding? Like go and like take a course in marketing or like
No, that's actually a great question. Long-term value of somebody's career in the people that go the furthest, in my experience, have a hybrid balance of two skills. They have technical background. They probably did engineering and technical work for a period of time, and then they branched over to the business side. Generally, those kind of people, a lot of them will have MBAs, right? I personally don't. But I have a lot of coworkers that do. They have, engineering bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in business. And again, you're going to learn, especially in an MBA program, even more so than a bachelor's in business. You're going to learn about a lot of the kind of stuff that I was talking about around business cases and actually, making decisions on, how do you decide what to invest in and those kind of things. I took some basic business classes in college, macroeconomics, some of those kind of things. But yeah, I mean, when you're in engineering, they're going to tell you very closely, the coursework that you have to take within the engineering disciplines to get your degree. But yeah, I would highly recommend in some of your optional classes, you're going to have flexibility to absolutely look at some of the business classes. Marketing would be a great one. Yeah.
So our final question is about, I guess, particularly your job and something maybe like the mindset that you should kind of have for your job. As students without exposure to the job world, high schoolers commonly think of jobs as existing in like a vacuum by themselves, but that's rarely the case. So in most cases, it seems that people have to interact with other people in whatever area that they work in, whether that be a hospital or a company or a lab.
Yeah.
So coordination is just as important as the execution of your individual tasks. So as someone who works to direct the coordination of two different parties like product design and software development, what do you think is the most important value or an idea or something that you need to keep in mind to do your job well?
So So I actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to take that question in two different directions. The first way that I want to take the question is really, again, kind of a little bit of what I talked to you about that career journey. But the second one is the values. And I like that question about what do you have to do in terms of values. So the first thing I would say is I think you guys are completely right that when you come out, you think about a job when you're coming out of high school, you're coming out of job, you think about a job as an entity, a single thing. What you're going to find as you get into any business, though, is that that's a piece inside of a puzzle, right? The whole puzzle has to fit together to make the business work. And I would strongly encourage people sooner than later to start looking at the other pieces of the puzzle, right? Because you may find, hey, I'm perfectly happy being a coder and I want to work in R&D and I want to work in engineering. I just want to develop products. But you may say, no, I like working with customers. And by the way, engineering very rarely actually gets out and talks to customers, right? You may say, no, I like talking to customers. I like selling. I like convincing people why my stuff's really great. Or you may say, no, I like the operational side. I actually like the numbers and I like project management and I like figuring out how all these pieces fit together and orchestrating them together in order to do that. And so take the first couple of years to start looking around at the different jobs that are out there and the different roles that are available. But I was told this at this point, it's probably been at least 15, almost 20 years ago in my career, and it stuck with me, is you guys are still at the age of your life. You think you're going to be working for a long time, right? So just use round numbers though, and say you enter the work world somewhere around 25, you retire somewhere around 65. That's 40 years, right? So if you're extrapolating, maybe go 45 at the most 50, but say 40 years. Now, do you remember how many different jobs I told you that I've actually experienced, right? So use some round numbers. Say I've been working for 30 years. How many years did I stay in one job? Probably not much more than 2 to 3, right? So it was actually the CFO of my company one time that was doing career counseling for a group of us. And she basically said, depending on what your ambition is, if you want to be a vice president or you want to be a president or you want to be a CXO, CEO, a CFO, a COO, you want to be she says, you literally cannot afford to stay in any one role more than 3 years. You will have learned everything you need to know within 3 years. And then you need to start mapping out what are the experiences you need in order to achieve the job that you want. So if your ambition is just to stay coding, you're probably okay. If you have broader business ambition, you need to start thinking about that map. What are the different experiences? Do I need sales experience? Do I need marketing experience? Do I need delivery experience? Do I need support experience? Do I need product management experience? You map out all of those and you kind of start to say, what do I need to do? For a CFO, that was a very unique path, dealing with things like regulatory and investors and all of that kind of stuff. But every job has that same kind of a mapping, okay? So I would definitely say start looking fairly soon. Within 5 years of being in your job, you should start to have an idea of what you enjoy, what are you good at, what do you want to do, and then you can start mapping out that trajectory pretty quickly of what do you want to do with your job. Now, I want to go to your next question though, and you talk about values, about what does it mean in terms of doing jobs where people have to work together. This is very, very clearly a soft skill. And by the way, it's not something you're going to learn in university. It's something you have to be very intentional about. And I'm going to tell you, it's a hard balance to strike because you're going to find some people, they're going to err on the side of ambition and aggression. And what I mean by that is they're basically going to say, I really don't care how badly I damage relationships. I don't care how I treat people. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my job done. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my recognition and in order to get, be successful in my area. You're going to have other people that are going to err too far on the other side. And they're going to err too far on not trying to ruffle feathers, right? It's really that whole point about conflict avoidance. They really don't want to cause any problems, and they're just going to stay quiet, and they're basically going to say, oh, whatever these other guys say, I'm just going to go along because I don't want to cause it. If you want to grow in a leadership type of position, you've got to find the ability to strike the balance between those two things. And so what I would basically say is I don't believe in the personally, I don't believe the best way to achieve those type of jobs is through the ultra aggressive mentality. I think it's very possible in terms of being assertive about what needs to be done while balancing human need. And what I mean by that is people have emotions, they have motivation, they have what incents them to do things correctly. And everybody, has those kind of needs. And if you're able to balance those two things, you're able to bring people along and encourage them and incent them to actually achieve the business result. Because ultimately, if you're too focused on meeting your result, you're going to cap out as well, because people are going to start to see you're only in this for yourselves. And at those much higher levels, they're looking at, do you have the business results in mind? And if you're working for a good company, they're going to strike that balance. I actually do think I work for a good company and strike that balance between ensuring that you meet the business results, but you do it in the right way. And that has a lot to do with the culture and the relationships in the company, because you will clearly find there are some leaders that will absolutely disagree what I say. There are certain companies that their cultures are very, very different from what I'm explaining. But I think, working for a company that has that type of a culture is important. That's important for me personally. And so balancing getting the job done, but doing it in the right way while being ethical, while practicing ethical business practices, both internal and with your customers, I think that's very important. I feel fortunate that I work for a company that actually has those kind of ethics and culture.
How did you come to be able to develop those skills that allows you to be a good leader in the workplace and be able to work well with kind of helping people work together, from maybe people who have different backgrounds, or like you said, like different maybe tendencies in regards to like how they like to work with other people?
Sure.
Was it like a natural thing that kind of developed as you progressed through different jobs, or did you kind of have to like consciously think about developing those skills for where you wanted to get to or so?
So that's a very complex question. Some of it is natural, some of it is learned, right? And that's going to be very, very different on a person by person basis. I think the ability to self-evaluate and understand your strengths and weaknesses is very important. I mean, within my personality, I think I have always been a kind of person that I valued people and valued relationships. You guys both personally know my own personal story. I mean, as part of my own faith as well. But the ability to apply that in a work world has its challenges. And so when you realize weaknesses, deficits in your leadership skill set, you should seek out ways to rectify that. And some of that actually forces you to do very uncomfortable things. And some of that you can do through reading, some of it you can do through formal training, but all of it takes intentionality in terms of how do you develop it. So I'm trying to think, I guess I'll give you a practical example. One, I'll be a little bit, what's the word for it? I'll expose myself a little bit, right? So one of the areas I'm personally working in my own life right now is listening, right? I come from a technical background where for a long time I held the technical edge, and I always felt my way was right, right? And so I'd get into a discussion or debating opinions, and I always felt that my job was to defend my idea so that I could get what I wanted done. And it was an amazing experience when I realized, you know what? there's a lot of other really smart, really creative people. And actually, it's almost more important in order to be able to synthesize the best ideas of all the super smart, creative idea to come up with the best answer, not actually defending my own position on it, right? And so a lot of what I've had to be working on is not talking so much and listening more and listening to the other people and using things like, I don't think they teach a lot of this in university, but what they call active listening, right? You guys familiar with that concept of active listening, right? You basically, somebody says something to you and you play it back to them through your own language. This is what I think I heard you say, right? And you play it back to them to make sure that you understood it correctly. And so a lot of those concepts of really thinking and listening, I've had to work on. I think everybody has to do that themselves. They have to identify, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm a little bit weak at. This also requires a lot of humility in the performance review process of finding good managers that will actually tell you the truth of what you need to do and do better, and you not be defensive about that and really take that constructively and kind of say, they're probably right. I could do that better. If you've got a good manager, that's what the whole performance process is about, is helping you get to the next level in your career. But it can be intimidating. A lot of people don't like to be told this is where you can improve, and they take it defensively. But if you do that, you evaluate yourself, you listen to others, you see where you need to improve, you take intentional effort, whether that be through training, reading, whatever it is, in order to start thinking about it, you're always going to have areas throughout your career that you can continue to get better at. And it's the same way you say, hey, I want to learn this new programming language, the soft skills, the human interaction skills, the business skills, those all take work to develop too. You have to be intentional about it.
Thank you so much for telling us about all these things. I think it's really helpful for people who maybe want to go into this area but don't really know like how exactly things are like. And I think you also told us a lot about how broad of like an array of different jobs with like that requires different things from people are available in the technology industry.
Yep. Well, I thank you for having me. I hope it's been helpful and useful. I agree. I think most people, when they're still fairly young, they don't have these exposures, and giving them a little bit more insight to the opportunities that will be available is going to be really helpful for the people that are able to see your results as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.